Raymond Calder saw the watch before he saw his son. It sat beneath the pawnshop glass on a square of black velvet, tilted toward the front window like any other used thing waiting for a buyer. Ray stopped with one hand still on the door handle. For a second, the little bell above him kept shaking, bright and harmless, while his eyes stayed fixed on the silver case, the worn brown leather strap, and the empty place on his left wrist where that watch had rested for nearly 18 years. Then he heard Brian's voice from the counter. "Dad doesn't even wear it anymore," his son said. "Half the time he forgets what's his." The pawn shop owner looked from Brian to Ray, then down at the watch. Brian turned and saw him. For one quick second, his face changed. Not guilt exactly. More like irritation at being interrupted before he could finish making something sound reasonable. "Dad!" Brian said, stepping away from the counter. "You shouldn't be here." Ray let the door close behind him. "I came to pick up the weed trimmer cord," Ray said, though he had already forgotten the errand. "What is Ellen's watch doing in that case?" Brian glanced toward the glass. "It's not Ellen's watch," he said too quickly. "It was yours, and it's just been sitting in your dresser." Ray walked to the counter slowly. The shop smelled like old leather, coins, dust, and metal polish. A radio murmured somewhere behind a shelf of guitars, but nobody in the room seemed to be listening anymore. "May I see it?" Ray asked. The pawn shop owner hesitated. Brian gave a hard little laugh. "Dad, come on! Don't make this a scene!" Ray did not look at him. "I asked to see my watch." The owner unlocked the case and lifted it out carefully. When he placed it on the counter, Ray did not reach for it right away. He looked at the price tag tied around the strap. $180. Ellen had placed that watch in his palm after his retirement dinner and said, "Now maybe time can belong to you for once." Ray swallowed once. Brian leaned closer and lowered his voice. "We needed money. It's not like you were using it." Ray finally touched the watch with 2 fingers. He turned it slightly toward the light and pointed to a thin scratch near the clasp. "That happened the day your mother dropped a grocery bag on the porch," Ray said. "Jar of peaches broke right beside my shoe." Brian stared at the scratch. The pawn shop owner looked at Brian. Brian did not say a word. The pawn shop owner reached under the counter and pulled out a yellow copy of the ticket. Brian's hand moved before his face did. "Carl, you don't need to drag paperwork into this," he said. "It's a family thing." Carl Bennett looked at the ticket, then at Ray's fingers resting beside the watch. "It became my thing when it came across my counter," Carl said. Ray read the line upside down first. Item received from Brian Calder. Below it was Brian's signature, hard and slanted, pressed so deep the pen had nearly torn the paper. Carl turned the ticket around so Ray could see it clearly. It says here the person pawning the item confirms clear ownership. Ray did not look at Brian. He looked at the watch. Brian exhaled through his nose. "Dad, I was going to get it back. It was temporary." "You told him it was yours," Ray said. "I told him what made the transaction easier." Carl's expression tightened. Brian shifted his weight and lowered his voice. "We've got bills, Dad, real ones. You have a house full of things you won't even touch, and everybody has to tiptoe around them like they're holy." Ray slid the watch closer by the edge of the strap. The leather was cracked near the buckle. Ellen had once said she liked it better that way because new leather never looked like it had kept anybody company. Ray turned the strap over and touched one link near the case. "This one's not original," he said. Brian frowned. "What?" Ray held the watch toward Carl. "Ellen had that link replaced after it caught on the screen door. Sam Alvarez did it. You can see the colors a little warmer than the others." Carl leaned in. The replaced link was small, but under the counter light it showed exactly as Ray said, just a shade different from the rest. Brian stared at it as if the watch had betrayed him. Carl slowly picked up the pawn ticket again. "Brian," he said, "did your father give you permission to pawn this?" Brian's jaw worked once. That's not the point. It is in my shop. Ray took his hand off the watch. Carl folded the ticket and set it beside the price tag. I'm putting a hold on the sale until I get this authenticated. Brian's head snapped up. Authenticated? For what? Carl looked at the watch, then at Ray. To find out what else you didn't know. Carl wrapped the watch in a soft gray cloth like it had stopped being merchandise. Brian stood near the counter with his arms folded, but his eyes kept dropping to the folded pawn ticket beside the register. Sam's shop is 2 blocks over, Carl said. He's handled watches around here longer than I've owned this place. Ray nodded once. Then call him. Brian gave a short laugh with no humor in it. You're really going to make a whole production over this? Ray looked at him for the first time since the ticket came out. No, he said. You already did, Carl made the call. 20 minutes later, Samuel Alvarez stepped into the pawn shop wearing a brown cardigan and carrying a small leather case. He had silver hair combed straight back and the steady hands of a man who had spent his life holding things other people were afraid to drop. When Carl unwrapped the watch, Sam's face changed just a little. Well, he said quietly, I've seen this one before. Brian's shoulders stiffened. You remember one old watch? Sam did not answer him. He lifted it with gloved fingers and turned it under the light. Ray watched the watch move from hand to hand and felt something tight in his chest that he refused to show. The clasp sticks if you close it too fast, Ray said. Sam tried it. The clasp caught halfway with a tiny click. Ray pointed again. There's a dent on the right side. I dropped it carrying groceries for Ellen after her knee surgery. Sam tilted the case. The dent was there, shallow but clear. And it runs a little slow in February, Ray added. Always has. For the first time, Brian looked less angry than uncertain. Sam opened his leather case and took out a loupe. Master Calder, did I replace a link on this year's back? You did, Ray said. Ellen brought it in. I told her it didn't matter. She told me everything that keeps time matters. Sam's mouth softened at that. Carl glanced at Brian, then back to Sam. So? Sam set the watch on the cloth and leaned closer. I can confirm Mr. Calder knows this piece in a way a stranger wouldn't, he said. But there's something else. He turned the watch over slowly. The back has been opened before, Sam said, and not for a battery. Ray's eyes stayed on the caseback. Brian whispered, What does that mean? Sam reached for a smaller tool. Sam did not open the caseback right away. He looked at Ray first, then at Brian, then at Carl Bennett standing with both hands flat on the counter. This may leave a mark if someone forced it before, Sam said. Do you still want me to continue? Ray kept his eyes on the watch. Yes, Brian shifted beside him. Dad, this is ridiculous. It's a watch. Whatever's inside, it doesn't change anything. Sam slid a thin blade beneath the caseback seam. The pawn shop seemed to hold its breath. There was a soft click. Sam lifted the back plate and set it upside down on the gray cloth. At first, Ray saw only the dull inside of the metal, worn by years of warmth and wrist and time. Then Sam angled it toward the counterlight. Tiny engraved words caught the light. Brian leaned in despite himself. Sam read them quietly. For the years you gave away without asking to be thanked. Ray's hand closed around the edge of the counter. Carl said nothing. Brian stared at the words, then gave a quick shake of his head. That's probably about work. Retirement, right? Mom liked saying things like that. Ray did not answer. The engraving was smaller than he remembered, almost hidden on purpose. Ellen had never liked putting private things where the whole world could read them. Sam looked from the case back to Ray. Master Calder, do you remember this being added? Ray's voice came out low. Not that day. Brian caught the hesitation. What does that mean? Sam set the loop down and reached for a small notepad from his leather case. I can tell you this much, he said. This wasn't factory engraving. Your wife ordered it privately, Brian frowned. How would you know that? Because I recognize my own work, Sam said. The words landed harder than Brian expected. Ray finally looked up. When? Sam paused, thinking. I'd need to check my old service records to be exact, he said. But it wasn't long after your retirement. Brian let out a breath. See? That's all it is. Sam's eyes stayed on Ray. No, he said slowly. I remember one detail. Ray waited. Sam tapped the open caseback with one gloved finger. Ellen came in alone, he said. 2 days after your retirement dinner. Sam closed the watch carefully but kept the caseback facing up on the cloth. I don't keep every receipt forever, he said. But service envelopes. I kept those longer than I should have. Brian looked toward the front window as if measuring how much longer this could last. Carl locked the pawn shop door and turned the sign to back in 10 minutes. Then let's walk over. Sam's jewelry shop sat between a bakery and a tax office, narrow and quiet, with old clocks ticking on the wall behind the counter. Ray stood near the display case while Sam disappeared into a back room lined with metal file drawers. Brian lowered his voice. Dad, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. Ray looked at him. You put a price tag on your mother's gift. Brian's face tightened. I put a price tag on a watch we could get back. Before Ray could answer, Sam returned with a faded cream envelope held between 2 fingers. Calder, he said. Ellen's handwriting on the front. Ray took 1 step closer but did not touch it yet. The envelope had his last name written in Ellen's neat slant, with the watch model beneath it and a small note in the corner, inside engraving. Private. Brian saw the word and went still. Sam opened the envelope and tipped out a small appointment card. The ink was faded blue, but the date was clear. 2 days after Ray's retirement dinner. Brian glanced at the card, then at Ray. Mom probably wanted to surprise you. That's all. Ray looked at the date and felt a memory move somewhere behind his ribs, not clear enough to hold. Sam shook his head gently. She was upset when she came in. Not crying, just determined. Brian's voice sharpened. Upset about what? Sam slid the card back toward Ray. I don't know. She didn't tell me. Ray appreciated that answer more than a guess. He picked up the appointment card, then the envelope, and looked at Ellen's handwriting again. For the first time all morning, his hands were not steady. I need to check something at home, he said. Brian stepped forward. Check what? Ray folded the envelope once and held it against his chest. The drawer where Ellen kept the things she said I'd forget mattered. Ray's house was quiet in the way Ellen had left it, not untouched, not frozen, just orderly enough that every drawer still seemed to know what belonged inside it. Brian followed him into the small front room, but stopped near the doorway. Dad, what are we looking for? Ray did not answer right away. He opened the lower drawer of the oak secretary desk, the one Ellen had called her memory drawer, and lifted out a stack of birthday cards tied with blue ribbon. Behind them sat an old cream folder. Ray pulled it free and saw Ellen's handwriting across the tab. Ray's retirement dinner. Brian came closer despite himself. Inside were 3 photographs, a folded napkin with the factory logo, and the printed program from the evening Ray had tried not to make important. He unfolded the program carefully. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but the schedule was clear. Speeches, dinner, service award, watch presentation, retirement bonus presentation. Brian leaned over his shoulder. Bonus presentation? Ray read the line again. He remembered Ellen slipping the watch onto his wrist. He remembered the applause. He remembered wanting to go home before anyone could make him stand for another speech. But he did not remember carrying home any bonus envelope. Brian saw his face change. Dad? Ray tapped the program once. I need to call Dennis Cole. The payroll guy? He handled every final check in that plant for 30 years. Brian stepped back. Why does that matter? Ray picked up the phone from the desk and found Dennis's number in an old address book Ellen had kept updated in pencil. Dennis answered on the 4th ring, his voice rough with age but still sharp enough to recognize Ray before Ray finished, saying hello. Ray kept the call simple. Dennis, at my retirement dinner, was there supposed to be a bonus? There was a pause on the line. Brian watched Ray's face instead of pretending not to listen. Dennis finally said, "Supposed to be? Ray, it was issued. I remember because Ellen asked me to double-check the paperwork before the dinner." Ray closed his eyes. Brian whispered, "Issued?" Ray asked one more question. "Was it small?" Dennis gave a dry, humorless breath. "No," he said. "Ray, that was not a small check." Ray stayed on the phone with Dennis Cole, but his eyes remained on the retirement program. Brian stood beside the desk, one hand on the back of Ellen's old chair, quieter now than he had been all morning. "Dennis," Ray said, "do you remember what happened to it?" Dennis sighed softly through the line. "I can't speak to what you did after it left payroll, but I can tell you it cleared our side. If you kept your old bank papers, start there." Ray thanked him and hung up. Brian spoke first. "Dad, I don't understand. If you got a bonus, why didn't we know about it?" Ray closed the address book. "Maybe because I didn't want it talked about. That doesn't answer anything." "No," Ray said. "It doesn't." He carried the cream folder to the hallway closet and pulled down a green metal file box from the top shelf. Dust slid off the lid when he set it on the table. Brian looked at the box like it had been waiting for him. Ray unlocked it with a small key from his wallet and sorted through labeled envelopes. Insurance, roof repair, taxes, Ellen Medical, factory. His fingers stopped on one marked retirement, bank. Brian rubbed the back of his neck. "You kept all this?" Ellen said paper remembers when people don't. The words landed between them. Ray opened the envelope and removed a bank statement, 2 deposit slips, and a narrow blue cashier's check stub folded once down the middle. He smoothed it flat with his palm. Brian leaned in. The amount printed on the stub matched the bonus listed in Ray's retirement papers. Not close. Exact. Ray's thumb covered the payee line for a moment, as if even now some part of him wanted to protect the past. Brian's voice softened. "So you cashed it?" Ray shook his head. "Cashier's check," he said. "Different thing." Brian tried to read the paper from an angle. "Made out to who?" Ray lowered his hand. The payee was not Ray Calder. It was not Brian. It was not the factory, the bank, or any name Brian recognized. Across the line, in black type, was the name of a pediatric hospital. Brian stared at it. Ray folded the stub once, slower than before. Brian whispered, "Why would your retirement bonus go there?" Brian kept staring at the hospital name on the stub as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something ordinary. Ray did not offer an explanation. He carried the cashier's check stub back to the desk and laid it beside the retirement program, lining up the dates with one careful finger. Brian leaned over the papers. "That hospital was in Dayton," Ray nodded. "We only went there once," Brian said. "When Emily was little." Ray looked toward the hallway, where family photos ran in a crooked line down the wall. The youngest picture of Emily showed her in a pink sweater with one hand wrapped around Ellen's finger. Brian had always hated that photo because he said Emily looked too thin in it. Brian followed Ray's eyes and swallowed. "No," he said. "Insurance handled that." Ray opened the green file box again. Brian's voice sharpened. "Dad, insurance handled most of it. Linda and I dealt with that. We had payment plans, but we handled it from the kitchen doorway." Linda said, "Handled what?" Neither man had heard her come in. Brian turned fast. "Nothing. Dad's digging through old papers." Linda stepped into the room slowly, her purse still on her shoulder. Her eyes dropped to the cashier's check stub. The hospital name changed her face. Ray did not ask her anything. He only walked to the lower shelf of the secretary desk and pulled out a thin gray folder tucked between tax envelopes and appliance manuals. On the tab, in Ellen's handwriting, were 3 words: Emily, hospital. Linda put one hand over her mouth. Brian shook his head once, small and stubborn. "Why would Mom keep a folder like that?" Ray held the folder but did not open it yet. Because she kept what mattered, he said. Brian reached toward it, then stopped before touching. Ray noticed. That small restraint mattered more than Brian knew. Ray opened the folder on the desk. Inside were discharge papers, an old parking pass, a folded insurance summary, and a white receipt clipped to the back page. The paper had gone soft at the creases. Ray unclipped it and placed it beside the cashier's check stub. The numbers matched. Exact amount, same date, same hospital. Linda whispered, "Brian!" Brian did not answer her. He was staring at the receipt like it had just asked a question he was afraid to hear. The receipt lay between them like something alive. Ray had seen the numbers before, years ago, but never with Brian standing close enough to understand what they meant. Linda reached for the desk, steadying herself. That was the balance after insurance. Brian shook his head, but the motion had lost its force. "No, we had a payment plan. You had one," Linda said. Then it disappeared. Brian looked at her. She kept her eyes on the receipt. "I thought the hospital adjusted it. Or your mother called someone. I never knew." Emily came in from the hallway with her keys still in her hand. She stopped when she saw her mother's face, then her father's, then Ray standing beside the old desk with the watch box under his hand. "What happened?" she asked. No one answered right away. Ray slid the hospital receipt a few inches toward her, not pushing it, just making room for the truth to be seen if she wanted to see it. Emily read the hospital name first, then the date, then the amount. Her voice changed. "This was me?" Brian turned away from the desk. Ray did not chase him with words. He looked down at the watch box, the same one Ellen had saved with the paper lining still tucked into the corners. The empty space inside it looked smaller than the silence in the room. Brian rubbed both hands over his face. "You should have told me." Ray's eyes stayed on the box. "You had a little girl in a hospital bed," he said. "You already looked like a man carrying a house on his back. That was my responsibility." "Yes," Ray said, "and you were drowning in it." Brian's face flushed, not with anger this time, but with something closer to shame. Emily took one step toward Ray. "Grandpa, why didn't you ever say anything?" Ray rested his fingers on the lid of the watch box. "Because Ellen understood," he said. Linda looked up. "Understood what?" Ray opened the hospital folder again. Behind the insurance summary, beneath a folded discharge instruction sheet, was a smaller piece of paper Ray had not touched in years. Ellen's handwriting showed through the thin page. Ray stopped with his fingers on the edge. Brian stared at it. Emily whispered, "Is that from Grandma?" Ray did not unfold it yet. Ray held Ellen's note between two fingers, but he did not open it in front of them. Not yet. Brian's eyes followed the paper. "Dad, if that explains this, just read it." Ray looked at his son. "Some things were written for me before they were written for everybody else." The room went quiet. Ray walked into the kitchen and sat alone at the small table where Ellen used to sort coupons, birthday cards, and bills with the same careful hands. Only then did he unfold the note. Ellen's handwriting was steady across half a page. "Ray, if Brian ever finds out, he may be angry before he is grateful. Let him be. Shame makes people loud. You gave that money because Emily needed a chance, and because Brian needed to stand back up without knowing who held him there. I had the engraving made so at least one thing in this house would remember what you gave away." Ray read it twice. The words did not surprise him. They only made him miss her harder. When he came back to the front room, Brian, Linda, and Emily were still standing around the desk, none of them touching the papers. Ray placed Ellen's note beside the watch box. Emily read it with one hand pressed to her mouth. Linda turned away before her tears fell. Brian read the first line, then stopped. His jaw tightened, but this time he did not argue. Ray gathered the papers slowly. The pawn ticket, the cashier's check stub, the hospital receipt, the retirement program, Ellen's note. He left the discharge papers and insurance summaries in the folder. Not every private pain needed to become evidence. Brian watched him stack the documents beside the empty watch box. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Keeping only what matters." Brian looked toward the door. For a moment, Ray thought his son might speak. Instead, Brian picked up his keys from the edge of the desk. Linda said his name softly. Brian did not look at her. He walked out of the house, and the front door closed behind him with a careful click, not a slam. Emily turned to Ray. "Grandpa, is he leaving?" Ray kept his hand on the empty watch box. "I don't know," he said. Outside, Brian's truck started. Ray looked down at Ellen's note, then at the place where the watch should have been. For the first time all day, he wondered whether Brian had walked away from the truth or gone to face it. Brian's truck was gone for 43 minutes. Ray did not count them on purpose, but the kitchen clock kept doing it for him, each tick too loud against the papers stacked beside the empty watch box. Linda stayed near the sink with her arms folded across herself. Emily sat at the table, Ellen's note in front of her, reading the same line over and over as if it might change if she blinked. Then headlights swept across the front window. Brian came in without knocking, but he stopped just inside the door like he had remembered the house was not his to enter any way he pleased. His jacket was open, his face pale from cold air, and in both hands he carried the watch box. Nobody moved. Brian walked to the kitchen table and set the box down in front of Ray. "I went back," he said. Ray looked at the box, not at him. Brian reached into his coat pocket and took out the pawn ticket, the redemption receipt, and a small white envelope with Sam Alvarez's name printed across the corner. "I paid Carl," Brian said. "The loan, the fee, everything." Sam checked it again before he put it back. His voice caught once, and he forced it steady. "I asked him not to polish it." Emily looked up. Brian glanced at her, then back at Ray. He said some scratches belonged to the owner. Ray's fingers rested flat on the table. Brian opened the watch box. The watch lay inside, the brown leather strap curled around itself, the silver case dull under the kitchen light. It looked smaller than it had under pawn shop glass, but more alive. Brian placed the pawn ticket beside it. Then he placed the redemption receipt on top of the ticket, not hiding either one. "I said it was mine," he said. "It wasn't." Ray still did not speak. Emily reached for the hospital receipt and set it beside the watch. The receipt, the ticket, and Ellen's note formed a small line across the table, plain papers carrying more weight than anyone in the room wanted. Linda covered her mouth, but this time she did not turn away. Brian looked at the receipt, then at the watch. "I thought you kept things because you didn't know how to let go," he said quietly. "I didn't know some of those things were holding parts of us together." Ray's eyes lifted. Brian stopped there. No excuse came after it. For the first time all day, he seemed to understand that more words would not repair what his hands had done. He picked up the watch. Slowly, he stepped around the table and reached toward Ray's left wrist. Ray's hand rose before Brian touched him. "No," Ray said. Brian froze. Ray's voice stayed calm, but every person in the room heard the line being drawn. "Ask me first." Brian looked at the watch in his hand, then at the empty place on his father's wrist. His face folded, not dramatically, just enough for the anger to finally leave it. He lowered his hand. "Dad," Brian said, barely above a whisper. "May I?" Ray looked at his son's lowered hand. For a long moment, he said nothing, and nobody in the kitchen tried to fill the silence for him. Then Ray turned his wrist palm up. "Yes," he said. Brian moved carefully, like the watch had become heavier since the morning. He set the case against Ray's wrist, pulled the worn leather strap through the buckle, and fastened it one hole looser than before. Ray adjusted it himself. That small motion made Brian step back. Emily wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand. Linda sat down slowly, as if her knees had finally remembered the weight of the day. Brian looked at the watch on Ray's wrist. "I'm sorry, almost came out, but he swallowed it, maybe because he knew the words were too small." Ray picked up the pawn ticket from the table and slid it into the empty watch box. Brian watched him do it. "That stays there," Ray said. "Not to punish you. To remind both of us what happens when people start deciding an old man doesn't know his own life." Brian nodded once. Ray closed the box halfway, then opened it again and placed Ellen's note beside the ticket. "My house is still my house," Ray said. "My things are still my things. You don't come in and take. You don't speak for my memory. You don't decide what I'm done needing." Brian's face tightened, but he did not defend himself. "No," he said. "I won't." Ray studied him, looking for the quick answer, the excuse, the old impatience. It was not there. "I'm not promising this goes away tonight," Ray said. "I know, but if you want coffee Sunday morning, you can come at 9, 1 hour, no fixing me, no managing me." Brian's eyes reddened. "I'll be here," he said. Emily leaned forward. "Grandpa?" Ray looked at her. "Will you tell me about the night Grandma gave you the watch?" Ray touched the watch face with 2 fingers. "She waited until everybody went home," he said. "Factory men had made speeches all evening, but your grandmother never liked speeches much." A faint smile moved across Linda's face. Ray leaned back in his chair. "She put it in my hand and said, 'Now maybe time can belong to you for once.' Then she cried because she knew I wouldn't know what to do with it." Emily laughed softly through tears. Brian sat down across from Ray, not close enough to crowd him, not far enough to hide. For the first time that day, he listened without reaching for an answer. Outside, the last light faded from the kitchen window. Inside, Ray's watch ticked steadily on his wrist, while the pawn ticket and Ellen's note rested together in the old box, holding the wound and the love in the same quiet place.